Buns. He gravely studied the yawning holes the man had made in the basement of the big barn. The lower horse barn had become a shell. The ramp still led to the high loft chicken coop, but the hen house rested on bare corner post of the lower barn. The high hen house stood as if on stilts. All the boards had been turned off from the lower barn. Only the naked post remained. Beyond the bare post, even horse stables inside the lower barn had been partly dismantled. The bewildered dog trotted to the wide doorway of the basement barn. Again, he stood still. The hay loader no longer rose beside the doorway, where it had stood, where there was nothing but a heap of mortar, dust, and chipped stones. Against the back wall rose a tier of nest and a partly built roast. The dog's tail waved dubiously. Then he hurried, turned to the door from the doorway, and trotted to the house. The potato crate that had been once held to feed the little hen leaned up, ended and empty against the wall of the house. But the gate in the fence around the little parsnip's garden was wide open. The dog hurried through the gate. One by one, he pulled up the last remaining parsnips and moved them down. A sudden rain squall drove him from the garden back to the barn. There was no shelter in the open basement. The big dog stood mute and miserable, looking again at the few strangeness. The wind hailed through the yawning openings. Rain lashed and swept over the floor. The dog looked up at the trap door, high and unreachable. Suddenly, he turned and set out through the rain to the fallen willow at the edge of the swamp. On his big meal of parsnips, the dog ran almost sturdily, and his tail began to wag as if he neared the tree. He crawled gratefully under the shelter of the low-hanging willow, crawled almost to the nest and little hen. The little hen watched him quietly, did not lash out at him. The whole mind seemed to be on the eggs, as if she were waiting, as if she were listening to the eggs under her. Only the little hen heard the soft click of the egg. Now the egg stirred under her, rolled a little. The little red hen rose, tenting her wings over the edge of the nest, spreading them wide against the great things happening under her. Suddenly, she searched under their ruffled feathers with a careful bill. She pushed and nudged, then, with a soft, gentle wing, she tucked a little yellow chick tight against her warm body. The dog's eyes jumped wide for a moment. He saw the liveliness of a chick that hadn't been there the moment before. That had been an egg. The little hen rose up again. Another egg had started wobbling, and tenderly the little hen rolled it over. A new chick stepped out of the broken halves of its egg. The little hen settled over it, and softly, securely, her wings closed over the two chicks. The big dog lay rigid, motionless, eyes steadfast on the great wonder. In the nest, the little hen was rising up for the last time. Now, her round knuckle bones were planted amongst the broken shells of the eggs, and four staring, peeping chicks. Against one foot, the last egg rocked, wobbled, and almost circled the little round knuckle bones. It continued, stirred, acting alive, but nothing happened. The little hen pushed her bill towards the egg, gently tapped the egg. Under the bill, the egg exploded in the tiniest of explosions. The shell fell apart, and the moist chick stood up, looked up, and began peeping at the new mother. The four earlier chicks chipped and peeped along with. But now the little hen did not settle back on her chicks. She stood readily, wings gently lifted, tending her chicks, but not closing down over them. The long patience and the long wait were over. Now there could be no more waiting. The journey home had begun. The little hen stepped out of the nest, clacked to a new clacking of her 5 chicks. The dog weaved himself to his feet, eagerly pushed from under the willow, eager to go home with the little hen. Under the willow, as if the soft clackings pulled up one by one, the 4 chicks came tumbling over the rim of the nest. But the last little chick had trouble getting up the steep sides. The little hen turned over the rim and clacked desperately, creeping chick up out of the depths of her nest. She lifted over her wing and let the last chick run under it for a moment. Then, with the soft clackings steaming out behind her, she led the 5 chicks from under the tree on their long journey home. They clacked them along, forcing the chicks to follow her, finding for them a little path amongst the tall grass and the taller weeds. She croaked, directed, and commanded. Her head twisted everywhere to see that they were obeyed and stayed near. The big dog walked a few steps, waited, walked again, and led the way home for her and her brood. But the sweep of the wind was over the field. The wind flattened and tangled the lash. Long grass of spring, the tiny chicks were engulfed in a waving sea of grass. They struggled, they muddled along the grass and the weeds 10 times taller than them. There, the field was a sea and confusing jungle, but always there was the eternal soft steamer of the cracklings from their little red mother to lead them on. A loud chirping chick suddenly got itself completely lost in the towering forest of stalks that was a weed clump. It was dark under the weeds, and the chick all at once fell silent. Suddenly, all the peeping chicks were silent. Somehow, the 4 chicks had found the 5th under the sheltering dark leaves. And since it was dark, the 5 huddled in silence. In the darkness, the little hen became frantic. The dog came running back. The dog easily nosed out the chicks under the weeds. He stood over the group as the little hen gathered her brood, clacking her relief, cackling her love. High above the field, the male hawk let himself to be swept along under the screwing clouds. In a moment, he swept far beyond the field. But brazen, bold eyes, in that moment, looked down on the little group in the field. The hawk had seen the movement of the yellow eggs deep down in the wind-flattened grass.